So today we're going to be using procedural rock assets I've made in Houdini, and we're going to be making very fastidious looking igneous rocks. The final result looks something a little bit like this. I featured one of the renders a few weeks ago in my grading tutorial, so we're going to be trying to achieve results just like that. And of course, you're going to want to follow along. So there's a free rock asset on my store. If you want to dive into the rocks a lot deeper and support me, there will be a rock pack full of them. That also includes my project files, my original textures, my line setups, all of that. And of course, with all that being said, we will get into Cinema 4D and see what kind of results we can get. Okay, so when you first bring your rock into the scene, you're going to see something that looks a little bit like this. It's a rock, nothing too special as of right now. Now, of course, if you look at it against the scale of a cube, it's quite small, so I prefer to work generally when I'm just doing renders for Instagram, just to the scale of kind of the size of a cube. I think there is no need to be at the scale of, well, we don't know if this rock would be the size of a rock you could fit in your hand, or we don't know what kind of size it would be, whether it be a piece of sand, it could be anything. But what we're going to do is we're just going to scale it up. Now I am using the rock here that is of course free, and I'm just going to take you through our render settings. So generally for Instagram, what we can do is we can do 1080 by 1080, or we can do true 1K, which would be 1024 by 1024. And when you're posting on Instagram, you want to stick to something like this. You see a lot of people that will do a slightly tall format of 1080 by 1350. Generally for renders, I like to do 248 by 248. That's a 2K square. You can see it telling us that there. And if you want to go 4K, of course, it's 496 by 496. It's endless limits. But what we'll do for now is we will work in 1K for Octane's sake. And when it comes time to render this out properly, if we want to put that up more, we can. Now, first of all, switch to path tracing, and then we'll go into our render settings. And generally, you'll see me do this in tutorials, and I've noticed that I kind of do it without saying why I'm doing it. So, and I just sort of assume you don't want to see my render settings, but I think you should see them. And I will generally work in the same amount of samples as the composition, which is 1024. There's no reason they're connected. I mean, unless I go to 48 or whatnot. So generally right now I'll do 1024. I'll pop these down to 8 and 8. I'll keep hitting tab till I get to GI clamp. I'll hit 10, and I will pretty much leave it there. And then I will bring up any of these if I need to, depending on what textures I use and whether I need more specular depth or whatnot. I genuinely think these settings are probably going to see you through. If your render times are high, you're probably going to end up clocking on adaptive sampling or putting up the samples. But that's kind of it for our render settings. And now we can lock our viewer and zoom out. Well, we should send it to the render first. And you can see now that the live viewer is sorted. And what I will do next is I'll pop in a camera and I will put my focal length up quite a bit. Personally, I think you're going to get a lot more professional renders, especially, you'll see me do this a lot if you're in your classic kind of, let me pop in a daylight actually while I show you this. You pop in a daylight. So if I come up close here with a 36mm, personally, I think that doesn't look nearly as good as doing 135, putting the same amount in frame, and you just get a much more closed, dramatic, cinematic shot. I just love it much more. I think it looks a lot cooler, and I think if you're, going into a really wide lens and coming up close, you get way too much depth, and it can mess with scaling, and I just think it looks much cooler to go to something absolutely insane and back up. Just kind of what I like to do. But what we'll do is we will zero out our rotation and our X and our Y, and we'll pop out of the Z-axis. And now we're looking at our rock. That daylight definitely helped. Maybe if you haven't put one in, put one in. And we're not going to be lighting this with the daylight, but you can see the kind of detail we're picking up here, and we're going to add more detail on top of that through noises. So I'm going to find a position I like, and if you don't know that shortcut, that's W to switch to the world axis. That's your object, your normal axis, and your world axis, which is a good thing to know because we've all been noobs and sat doing this, trying to move something around, when you can just switch to your world axis and sort it out. Anyway, what we're going to do is find a rotation we like, and what will we go for? What will we go for? I think that maybe looks cool. Maybe something with a bit point to it. World axis. That was a similar position to how I actually did the render, was something like this, with the pointy bit at the bottom. Maybe we'll do that. Okay, next up, I'm going to delete the daylight because I don't want it. And I'm going to put in a texture environment. And I'm going to make it black. And I'm going to start lighting the rock. So, I'm going to grab an area light. And I'm going to press F2, cameras, perspective. I'm going to do NA. Yep. And in fact, I'm just going to put the rock to the center world here, there. And with this light, I'm going to bring him out to the side. And I'm going to make him a lot smaller than he is right now. So we'll maybe do 50 by 50. Oh, that was the wrong thing, sorry. We'll do 50 by 50. And then we're going to go distribution, C4D Octane, fall off map, switch it to 90 degrees inside of it. And I'm going to put the power to 10,000. Now, and I'm going to apply a target. If you haven't seen my intentional lighting tutorial, we're using tricks from that right now. I'm going to try and get really sharp, kind of intrusive lighting on the rock. I'm going to try and get these really harsh shadows around the edges, because if we were on a much bigger light, it gets much harder to get those. Bring down the power for compensation and making that bigger. If I make it even bigger, you're going to see even more that we're getting light bleeding onto the sides here. So what we'll do is we'll make it 50, but I'm going to make it a bit taller on the Y. I'm going to make it 75. In fact, I'm going to make it 150. And then we'll put up our power again and switch to our normal axis. I'm going to back this away a lot. And then I'm going to duplicate this guy and bring him all the way over to the other side. And what I'm going to do with this light now is make it bigger. Maybe we'll do 500 by 500. And I'm going to bring down the power. I'm going to turn off my first light while I concentrate on this light. Bring down our power. And I'm going to start tinting him maybe a little bit orange. And we can put them both on now. And kind of see where this is going. I'll maybe push him around the back a bit. And put up the power a bit. You can see that looks okay. Now we'll add a Octane tag. And we'll put on some bloom just to stop that light from choking so much. And we'll put on our imager. And make sure the image stays quite flat and nothing's blown out. So we'll put our highlight compression. And it looks okay for now. Now that our scene's lit, we'll just call this key. And we'll call this fill. And we'll box them up and do Alt-G. Call them lights. And we'll maybe revisit them later. Next up, I'm going to create a studio to put this in. So we'll drop in a plane, drop him down, and put him to about 5K by 5K. And then holding Shift, put him in a bend. And then holding Alt, hit subdivision surface. And we'll put the strength to 90. Press F2 again. And we'll rotate the bend, holding Shift once. And then twice that way. And then again. And then apparently our camera has gone there, so then we'll do that. Make sure that it looks, make sure that the camera is facing it. And if we just bring the bend former down and flatten up that wall, and what you can see here, what we're getting is that really sharp shadow from the small light. Now the distance and the power of that light is what's causing the shadow, and that was why we intentionally did that before. We can press F1 now and come back, and I have planned out the render I want to go for, and I want this kind of nice white, almost kind of sci-fi looking rock. So what we'll maybe do is play with a little bit of texturing now that we've got our studio and light set up, and see what results we can get. So I've made a glossy material, and I'm going to apply that to the rock, and then what we're going to do is we're going to put a noise into the bump, and we're going to put on a transform and a projection, and we're just going to don't want to group it, we're going to solo it, and we're going to hit box, make the noise a lot smaller, just so it's kind of like, you know, when you feel a rock and you kind of get that roughness to it, that's kind of what we want. So then in fact we can keep that soloed, bring up our contrast, and then we kind of want to dabble between black and white, something that looks quite sparkly, and then we can pop that in the roughness as well. And if we were to change this to metallic and make it IOR plus color to make it black, and put up, sorry, turn off that, and put up our roughness a little bit, you're going to start to see the effects of the noise. If I put a gradient in the roughness here and we start playing with that, you can kind of see what it's doing. Now playing with the gradient is going to get you different results, of course, and playing with the contrast here and the gamma. So toying with that until you get a nice little sparkle to your rock is somewhere I like to go. You don't always need the gradient. You can, if you're precise enough, you can do it with just these two values. And this is something I like to do a lot to get that nice kind of rock shine on it. Unfortunately, it can get a little bit too sparkly, which I think is where you counter that with the contrast. And then we're going to get that nice kind of rock sparkle across it. Now I'm going to keep my rock white. So I'm going to go back to glossy. Keeping that sparkle, it will be a little bit less visible, but the effects are still there nonetheless. Whatever color you want to make your rock is up to you. What I will do, although, is get a color code, which I have here on my clipboard. I'm going to pop that in there, and I'm going to use this just to get a slight kind of off-white to add a little bit of variation to the image. Now, the reason for this is keeping things the default color, I don't think ever plays out as well as even if you just bump it into a slight off-white, and we could use a different color code like this, and just kind of get some colors that trick your eye a little bit. You see white, but it's not white. And we could do the same here by creating a diffuse material for the background, popping it on the BG, and popping an RGB spectrum, put it in the diffuse, put your color code there, and now we've got a similar image, but it's not similar. Now I am using this website here, coolers.co, and I use this a lot. I think planning out your renders, plotting them out, you come, you find a color palette, you say, okay, I'm going to use this color. You can see popular ones, all sorts. It's really going to improve your renders. It's going to help your work be a little less scattered and a little more intentional and essential. And I think coming here is perfect. I just used this color code here, FF1E6. So there's a good resource for you to use in your future renders. Now what we're going to do is we're going to rename this to rock, and we'll start developing this texture forward and see where we can take it. So I'm going to lightly scatter the rock, I'm going to do that by putting in a mixed material and then a second material. And in the second material, what we're going to do is we're going to make it specular. Now I'm going to put in a float into the amount, push it all the way up, and in our specular material, we're going to put the index to... Now, I've seen a lot of people trying to replicate the Thanos render I did, and it wasn't a full tutorial, of course, it was not a process video. And I want to show you a little bit more about that texture. So if you actually put your index down, fake shadows, put up your roughness, we'll get a scattering medium. And we'll leave that there for a second. We'll pop on the mix. I'll go the other way. I went the wrong way. We'll start bringing down your density. So we're just getting the edges scattering around here. And what's giving you this really nice kind of brushed look that I did get on that Thanos render was popping in your index. Gets you much less reflections, and it's good to remember that that is a resource to use and to make your rocks look cooler. Now, plugging the RGB spectrum into our absorption and our scattering, it's going to give us that really kind of floaty look. And if we just bump our float back into the middle, maybe about a third in, we're going to get a nice dip between the two, and there's something I like the look of. It's soft and it's nice, and it looks very cool. Now, I do think that's as far as I'm going to take the lighting. We do need to make sure that they both have the same sampling rate, so you can just stick them both to 100, and that means they're going to diffuse at the same rate, well, solve at the same rate. And I am going to bring in the base of the rock a little bit more, just to kind of carve out some more of that detail. Now that we're done with texturing, you can take that in any way you want, mess with it. I encourage you to experiment and artistically drive it where you like. Now, of course, you're probably wondering, what can you do next? You might have tons of creative ideas, and I'm excited to see them. But one thing I want to show you is how we can cut up an object like this that has something of about 2 million polygons and not have much issue. You could use Volume Builder, you could use Voronoi Fracture, whatever you want to create interesting stuff. But we're just going to focus on cutting that. And we actually are going to do it with Voronoi Fracture. Now, usually we'd use a boolean, but booleans are messy and horrible things. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pop this in a Voronoi Fracture. Before that, though, pause Octane, because you don't want Octane to, you don't want to have to, you're going to be waiting so long for this. Not that long, not as long as a boolean. Boolean will just kill your software. But we don't want to have to wait for Octane to. So holding Alt, we'll pop in the Voronoi Fracture. And you can see here, if we just let it, don't want to see my taskbar, yep, so that looks cool enough, but we're actually just going to delete the source. Now what we're going to do is we're going to drop in a matrix, and in the matrix, you're going to set it to linear, and set it to 2 on the count, and then just put that in your source, and let it create the cells again. And it shouldn't take too long, and when it's done now, you're going to see we've got 2 pieces. You can have as many pieces as you want, but then what we're going to do is we're going to come to MoGraph, and we're just going to grab a step effector. And we don't want it that big, so we're going to turn off the scale. I'm going to come to the position, and you can see that we can just kind of push that apart. It's not laggy, it's nothing. And it's a very, very good way to cut highly dense objects. Now what we can do is move this cut around. It's very malleable. It can get a little bit annoyed with you if you drag down that Y value willy-nilly, so you've got to be a little bit tame with it. But if we maybe set this to 35, I think it's better to just type in and judge. I'm trying to get it somewhere around the x-axis on the world here. And I think it adds a really nice artificial look to your renders when you do something like this. You can kind of get that cool, very engineered look. You know, you're looking at something that looks very deliberate, and it keeps your topology completely clean, so you don't get any weird glitches or anything We'll just let this create the cells here and catch up. Now let's move down a little bit. But of course you can do a ton of weird stuff with this, and you can spin it around, you can make it bigger. I'm sure you know a little bit about the step effector. It's definitely a fun little thing to mess around with. So I'm probably just going to leave a nice kind of clean cut through the middle here without much separation. I probably wouldn't take this too much further for the sake of the tutorial. I've pretty much shown you every technique that I've used so far with them. I did do some things where I duplicated the rock and put it inside the rock a little bit smaller in a different color. Really basic stuff. Fun exercises to do for Instagram and see what results you can get. I really loved that incision that this Voronoi fracture gives you, so you can do a lot of interesting stuff with that. What I will do at this point is get this rock ready to render. So what we'll do is maybe do our 248 by 248 square, switch to Octane render, go to PNG, and switch that to 16-bit, and then of course pick your save point on your computer. And in the camera imager, I'm just gonna put in a LUT here, and I'm just going to do a little bit of grading on the image. Maybe make sure there's enough bloom, and I'm gonna come in a little bit with the camera, maybe get a little bit of a rotation, and I think that would be good enough to send to the render. Would maybe do 3000 samples to make sure we clear up all the noise, and then we can just hit render and let Octane do its thing. One last thing I wanted to touch on here is how we can make more renders that look like actual rocks. So I'm going to take you through that here. Here is the same lighting setup. You can see I've just duplicated the scene and turned it off. It's the exact same, although I turned off the fill light. So if you turn off your fill light, you're going to get this nice kind of meteor-like looking render. And they're also very interesting renders. And we can maybe just accept a bit more of a blowout here, so we could maybe reduce our highlight compression. And you can see I've grouped the texture here, and we're just going to go through creating a new texture. So if you just pop that on the rock here, and we come in the node editor. Now I'm going to show you this texture from Texture Haven. This is the texture I'm going to be using. It's free. If you just go on the site, they're a brilliant resource, and you look up rock 01, you will find this texture, and that's what we're going to be using. So what we'll do is grab an image texture, and we'll just load in the diffuse for that rock material. So you can see here I've got all the maps, and we're just going to bring in the 8K diffuse here. I'm going to pop that in, and we're going to put in a transform and a projection, and we're going to put it to box, and we'll leave the scale there. Just for a second, I'm going to up the roughness so I don't have to deal with it. And what we're going to do is we're going to put in a color correction. We're going to drag it in the middle of the wire there, and we're going to desaturate it, and I'm going to mess with the gamma and get a little bit of contrast. So we've still got that texture, but we've got more of a dark rock going on, which is definitely something I like. We can just duplicate that and then plug in our projection nodes, come here and grab the normal, and that's all we're going to be using from that rock texture. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use that noise technique I showed you before on the bump and the roughness. So if you put in a noise and set it to turbulence, and we'll put it in the roughness, and I'll put in a transform and a projection, and then what I'm going to do is set it to box again. We'll do what we did earlier, and we will solo this. I'm going to bring it down to about 0.3 in scale, and then from that I'm going to mess with the gamma and the contrast till we get a nice kind of look, and then disable that. That way I can see what's going on a little bit better. And maybe plug it in the bump at the same time, just so we can see what's going on. Maybe we want a bit more contrast. And when you start getting something that's equally sparky and bumpy, you know you're kind of on the right path.
And it's just getting something that isn't gonna give you so many fireflies that's hard to work with. I think sometimes an easier method can be to leave one for the roughness, like this, and then duplicate it and use a separate one for the bump. You can maybe mess with the scale a little bit more, and sometimes that can just give you a little bit more flexibility. I think that's something you probably don't want to stray away from doing, just because it can help you get the best results. And, you know, there's infinite depth to how we approach these things. And it can be very easy to just stay on one path and tweak things to death, and then you end up going crazy. And I think as that begins to render out there, it's definitely on the right path. What I would maybe do, bring down the gamma a little bit with the contrast. I'll probably keep that there. I think at this point it's probably more to do with my lighting situation than it is texturing. So if we switch lights here to the fill, we restore a bit of power in it, we can definitely see that the texture is at play. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bump up the power of the light to 25,000, 25, I'm going to do 35. I definitely like that. I think I even just like the fill light more here. I think it looks cooler. And you know, we can duplicate our camera, stay in on this lens and come in really close. And we have some really nice meteor like renders. That look very cool. So that's going to conclude the tutorial. I just thought I would show you this side of the renders as well and give you another look, because for all I know, you want to put that rock texture to use and you want to get the best you can out of it. My original scene was this scene here, and we can see here that it's a very similar look. It was definitely a lot more flushed out. I'm still only using one light, just on a black background, and you can see I've got quite a bit more detail. This is the same rock and it's the same texture setup. So you can see here if I open this up, you can just see the texture set up here, and it's the same. And there was maybe a bit more playing going on with the octaves and the omega, which I didn't do. But yeah, you can see that's the same. And I've got different rocks kind of stored here at different rotations because I liked different ones. And yeah, you can see that looks really nice. So this scene here will be available in the rock pack along with a bunch of others. So if you want to go check those out, be sure to go and do it. And yeah, that's the tutorial. So thanks for watching.